The evil thing always wants to kill the dream. Always in conflict. Have always been, will always be in conflict is the evil thing and the dream that comes from the Father. Always. And it might be you. That's the evil thing. It might be in your breast, the evil thing that exists, trying to kill the dream of someone else. Or it could be your dream that some evil thing is trying to kill. And guess what? The dream won't die, especially if it comes from the Father. It will not be put away. And sometimes, do you know what happens to us? Sometimes the evil thing in my breast tries to kill the dream that the Father gives me. I become the enemy of all that God wants to do with me. And in me, an evil thing exists that wants to consume the dream and kill the dreamer. It's not always external. It's not always somebody else who's trying to do it to you. It could be you and the evil thing in your heart. Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, let us slay him, and just throw him into some hole. And here's what we'll say. Some evil thing has devoured him. And then, we'll see what will become of his dreams. But the dream has a defender. The dream always has a Reuben. Somebody who stands up for the dreamer. Who's your Reuben? Who's your defender? Who guards your dreams? In this case, we see that Reuben, who's the oldest, by the way, he's the oldest boy. You know, he's the shepherd of the children in this family. He's the shepherd of the sheep too, but he's, the oldest child in a big family of children is always type A, is the shepherd of the children. Kind of tries to keep them all in line, doing what mom says to do. That's Reuben. Reuben's the type A. He's the one that wants to keep everything just so he wants to keep the water from getting troubled. And so listen to what Reuben says. Reuben delivered, he heard it. He heard them talking about killing Joseph. He delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. Notice how Reuben includes himself in this. Let us not kill him. Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness and lay no hand upon him. So Reuben gets them to don't do anything to him. Don't kill him. But, okay, if you want to put him in a hole, that's fine. You put him in a hole, but just don't kill him. And Reuben's, notice that last statement there in verse 22, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again. So Reuben's plan, his end game was get him back home, get him away from these murderous thugs. The evil thing had risen up and spoken, and Reuben was like, oh my gosh, this poor boy, I got to get him back to Dad, because in Dad's house, he's going to be safe, but not with these killers. So Reuben stands up for him. Now, we don't know what happens to Reuben. Reuben goes away, because when he comes back and finds the pit empty, he cries out about it. But here, for some reason, Reuben is not, I don't know where he went off to, but they get Joseph, because in verse 23, the plan's executed. And here's what happens. Joseph was come to his brethren, and they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him. And I'm sure that it felt really good to those brothers to tear that coat off him. I mean, just a little bit rough, to give us that coat. And they ripped it off. And who knows whatever happened to that old coat. I mean, they did soak it in blood and take it back to Dad, but it probably was torn and it was probably ripped. And I'm sure they enjoyed that too, tearing that up, because Daddy loved his baby boy more than everybody else. And they just wanted to, just a little bit, And I was interested when I was reading this, that as the brothers are tearing off the coat of Joseph, I was thinking about what happened when Joseph came out of the prison and told Pharaoh his dream and interpreted it for him. Do you know what Pharaoh did for Joseph? It says there in verse 42 of chapter 41, Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. So the brothers stripped him of that precious coat. But later on, 13 years later, he walks into Pharaoh's courtroom, and Pharaoh puts the ring on his finger, dresses him in fine linen, and a gold chain about his neck. You can't kill the dream. And even though these brothers stripped him bare, stripped him naked probably, down to his loincloth, it's not going to kill the dream. And they took him, it says there in verse 24, and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. You see, they're following the plan. They're following the plan, except for the killing part. They've not done that yet. They're still thinking about it. But they've stripped him of his coat, that nasty coat that they hated so much. And now they put him in the pit, the thing that Reuben said, go ahead and do that, put him in a pit. The pit's empty. There's no water in it. But they're still thinking about this dreamer and how they might kill him. However, later on in Egypt, even though he's put in an empty, dry pit, later on in Egypt, in chapter 41, Pharaoh makes him to ride in the second chariot. Yeah, Joseph goes from a pit to a prison, but then ascends to the second chariot. That's like Air Force Two. I mean, honestly, that's exactly what it's like. This is like Air Force Two. Only Pharaoh rides in Air Force One. But Joseph, he gets the second chariot. So he goes from pit to a chariot in just a few years. And then I think we have possibly one of the darkest statements. I think maybe this is a candidate for my list of the saddest statements in the Bible, right here. They sat down to eat bread. They sat down to eat bread. The darkest moment in this story, maybe, I don't know. I mean, perhaps the darkest moment in the story was when they said, let's kill him. Perhaps the darkest moment in the story is when they ripped off that coat and threw him down in the pit. And I'm sure they weren't gentle with him. You know, a few bruises along the way. It's not going to kill anybody. Maybe it'll make them feel a little bit better. But then after contemplating killing their brother, and after contemplating putting him in a pit and then executing that, they sit down and have lunch just like it's nothing, just like nothing's happened. Oh, the evil thing in our hearts, what it won't do. How blind it is, how dull the conscience is when the evil thing is allowed to roam free in our hearts. How gross, how dark, how abusive it is. And then we can just go and have our lunch. Oh, I think I'll have a bologna sandwich, please. Put a little mustard on that for me, would you, Reuben? Yeah, just, have some lunch. And there's Joseph over in the pit, crying, beat up, in a pit with no one to help him. Well, Judah comes to his rescue, the second defender. And Judah, I don't know. Reuben had a reason. Reuben's reason was he wanted to get him back to Dad. Judah's reason is, let's make a little money on this. Look what happens. Judah said to his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? That's a good question. We'll kill him, we'll get nothing out of it. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. You see, when Judah says, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, they're still thinking about killing Joseph. It's still in the plan somewhere. They're still thinking about killing him, but Judah proposes this plan, this change in the plan to make a quick buck, or whatever they had, a quick shekel. They're going to make some money on him. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. Which is better, right? I mean, it's better to sell him into slavery and make $1. It's better because then we don't kill him. And if he dies in slavery, is that our fault? And what's the plan for a boy 17 years old who's never really left the comforts of home? How is he going to do in a caravan of Midianites as a slave? He might not make it to Egypt. And what happens in the slave pens in Egypt? He might not live through that. And who's he going to get sold to? Who knows? And you know how they treat these slaves? They treat them like property. Well, you kill one, you just go get another. Or if one gets sick and dies, well, you just go get another. It's property, it's not person. And so when Judah says, hey, let's just sell him, we'll make some money. Oh, we don't want to kill him. He's our flesh. He's our brother. Let somebody else do that. That's the unspoken thing that's behind this. Just let somebody else kill him. You know, Reuben was right. Let's not shed blood. Let's not have any blood on our hands because after all, he is our brother. I mean, we don't want to admit that, but he is. So let somebody else do the killing part. And even though they let somebody else do the killing part, the dream doesn't die. And his brethren were content. His brethren were content. Actually, the Hebrew there is his brethren listened. They listened to him. They didn't really listen to Reuben. They didn't want to listen to Reuben. Reuben's the oldest. Reuben's always bossing them around. You know, Reuben always thinks he's the boss of everybody because he's the firstborn. Whatever, Reuben. But here's Judah. He's right in the middle of the pack. And he says, hey, you know what? Some money could be made here. They sell him for 20 shekels. Reuben's gone. Joseph's in the pit. They got it 10 ways. That's, 20 or 2 pieces of silver each. 20 pieces of silver they sell him for. Sounds pretty good. Dinner and a show. And it's free. And so they do that. The Ishmaelites are coming by, the Midianites, and they come over, and it says they drew him up. They lifted him up out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Now the dreamer and the dream, something happens to them. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. Look at that very last phrase. They brought Joseph into Egypt. Joseph probably thinks the dream is dead. Joseph probably thinks it's all over. I'll never see mom and dad again. I'll never see my brothers again. I'll never be back here in the land. I'll never have opportunity to love these people again. The dream, whatever that meant that God gave me, is gone. But guess what? God took the evil thing and used it in Joseph's life to see the dream come true. Sometimes we think that our dream, that vision that God has given us, is not going to happen because the circumstances in our life have changed so radically and so drastically that there's no way that it can come true. And what we don't know is the suffering that we are going through is the conduit to take us to the dream. The providence of God, ladies and gentlemen, is never, ever thwarted by the evil thing. God uses it to see His will accomplished. And that's what He does right here in this story. He uses the evil thing in the heart of those brothers to get Joseph to Egypt, because only in getting that boy to Egypt can that dream come true. Only in getting that boy into Potiphar's house can that dream come true. Only in getting that boy to be tempted by Potiphar's wife and accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into an Egyptian jail can that dream come true. Only then can the dream come true. And then he languishes in that prison. And yet all the while he's suffering in the caravan, in Potiphar's house, in the prison, the Lord is with him. And the dream, although Joseph thinks is dead, is still active. It's still going to happen because the providence of God won't be thwarted by the evil of any man or any group of men. And so he comes out of that prison, rises up, puts on a new coat, rides in a new chariot, and becomes the leader of Egypt to save life. And while the brothers probably got their revenge, and they thought, good riddance, don't have to listen to his dreams anymore, don't have to look at that nasty coat anymore, don't have to see that arrogant little twit walking around the campground anymore. The dream is dead and he's gone, and maybe he's dead and that's fine too. That's what they think. But God used them to complete His will and to save not only their lousy lives, but to save the life of everybody in Canaan and in Egypt where the famine hit. The dream cannot be killed. So what's your dream look like? Did you ever have one? What does it look like? Is it still active, or do you think it's dead? God has called you to something. What is it? What is it? What's your dream? If He called you to it, ladies and gentlemen, it will not die. And you might say, the circumstances in my life right now and the situation in my life right now mean that the dream is no longer active.